Ladies and gentlemen, today we dive into the life of one of America's most infamous gangsters, Danny Greene. He was a man of contradictions, both feared and admired, a criminal, yet a self-proclaimed Robin Hood. His rise in Cleveland's underworld and his brutal fall remain one of the most explosive chapters in organized crime history. Danny Greene was born on November 14, 1933, in Cleveland, Ohio, to Irish-American parents. However, his life took a tragic turn before it even truly began. His mother passed away just days after his birth due to complications from childbirth. With his father struggling to care for him, Danny was sent to live with his grandfather, an arrangement that shaped much of his early personality. Growing up in a tough neighborhood and without a stable family structure, Greene learned to fend for himself at an early age. From a young age, Danny exhibited a rebellious nature and an inclination toward leadership, often standing up to bullies and refusing to back down from fights. This toughness followed him into school, but his academic career was far from promising. He struggled in his studies, got into frequent trouble, and was eventually expelled from St. Ignatius High School. However, his natural charisma and street-smart intelligence allowed him to survive in an environment where only the strong thrived. Seeking discipline and a purpose, Greene enlisted in the United States Marine Corps in 1951 during the Korean War era. The military provided him with a sense of structure and reinforced his already strong-willed personality. While in the Marines, he excelled in physical training, marksmanship, and leadership, quickly rising to the rank of corporal. His time in the service gave him not only combat training but also a strategic mindset, skills that would later serve him well in the criminal underworld. After completing his service, Greene returned to Cleveland, where he initially tried to work legitimate jobs. However, his taste for power, along with his physical presence and military discipline, made him a natural enforcer. It wasn't long before he found himself involved in Cleveland's Longshoremen's Union, where his true rise to infamy began. His ability to intimidate, control, and outmaneuver opponents made him a feared and respected figure, setting the stage for his future criminal empire. After returning from military service, Danny Greene sought work and found an opportunity in the docks of Cleveland, Ohio. The city's waterfront was a vital hub for shipping and trade, and its workers were represented by the Longshoremen's Union. However, like many labor unions in major American cities at the time, corruption ran deep. Union leadership often worked closely with organized crime, engaging in extortion, bribery, and violent intimidation to maintain control. Greene, with his imposing presence and military discipline, quickly made a name for himself among the dock workers. He started as a regular laborer, but soon demonstrated an ability to lead. His fearless nature and willingness to use violence to resolve disputes gained the attention of those in power. In the early 1960s, he was appointed president of the International Longshoremen's Association Local 1317, a position that gave him significant control over the hiring and firing of workers. Under his leadership, the union became less about workers' rights and more about personal enrichment. Greene ran the docks like a crime syndicate, demanding kickbacks from workers in exchange for jobs, and using strong-arm tactics against those who opposed him. He pocketed money from union funds, manipulated contracts, and ensured that only those loyal to him were given work. Anyone who challenged his authority faced threats, or worse, some were beaten, and others mysteriously disappeared. His power at the docks also attracted the attention of Cleveland's criminal underworld, particularly the Italian Mafia, which had a strong presence in the city. The Mafia saw Greene as a useful ally, but he was never one to be anyone's subordinate. While he worked alongside the mob in various money-making schemes, he refused to fully submit to their authority. This defiance would later make him one of the Mafia's most dangerous enemies. Despite his criminal activities, Greene maintained a certain Robin Hood-like persona. He was known for dressing sharply, driving flashy cars, and handing out money to those in need. To the public, he projected an image of a tough but fair leader who stood up for the working man. However, law enforcement saw through his facade. By the mid-1960s, authorities launched an investigation into his corruption, eventually convicting him of embezzling union funds. Rather than serving time in prison, he was given probation, a sentence many believed was due to his connections and ability to manipulate the system. Although he lost his official union position, Greene was far from finished. His influence and power in Cleveland's underworld only grew stronger, and he began carving out his own criminal empire independent of the Italian Mafia. This decision would set the stage for the violent turf wars that would define the rest of his life. After being forced out of his position as a union leader due to corruption charges, Danny Greene did not fade into obscurity. Instead, he doubled down on his criminal ambitions, seeking to build his own power base in Cleveland's underworld. By the late 1960s, he had established himself as an independent force, one that refused to bow to the traditional powers of organized crime, specifically the Italian Mafia, which had long dominated the city's criminal operations. At the time, the Cleveland Mafia, led by James "Jack" White, LeCavalier, and other high-ranking members, controlled illegal gambling, loan sharking, and various rackets throughout the city. Most criminals either worked under them or paid a cut of their earnings in exchange for protection. But Danny Greene was different. He had no interest in working for the Italians. Instead, he sought to create his own criminal enterprise, rooted in his Irish heritage and independent from the established mafia structure. Greene's defiance of the mafia was not just ideological, it was personal. He openly mocked and challenged the Italian crime families, refusing to pay them tribute and even encroaching on their territories. This was unheard of at the time, as most outsiders who opposed the mafia were swiftly eliminated. But Greene was fearless, and his military training, street smarts, and willingness to use extreme violence made him a formidable adversary. As he built his own gang, composed mainly of fellow Irish Americans and other non-Italian criminals, Greene started taking over key criminal operations in Cleveland. He ran extortion rackets, engaged in loan sharking, and even established a foothold in gambling enterprises. What made him particularly dangerous was his ability to attract loyal men who were just as ruthless as he was. They saw him as a leader who was willing to take on the mafia and had the guts to back it up. The tension between Greene and the Italian Mafia quickly escalated into a full-blown war. The Mafia, seeing Greene as a major threat to their dominance, attempted multiple times to assassinate him. Bombs were placed in his car, shooters were sent after him, and ambushes were planned. But time and time again, Greene survived. This earned him a near-mythical reputation. Many began to believe he was invincible, protected by some kind of divine luck. One of the most famous assassination attempts against him occurred in 1971 when a powerful car bomb was planted outside his home. The explosion destroyed most of his house, but Greene, miraculously, walked away unharmed. Rather than going into hiding or showing fear, he made a bold move. He set up a lawn chair in front of the wreckage and defiantly sat outside, sending a clear message to his enemies: "I'm still here." This act of defiance only fueled the war further. Greene retaliated with his own wave of violence, targeting those who worked for the mafia. He orchestrated attacks, bombings, and assassinations of key mafia associates, making it clear that he would not be intimidated. Unlike most gangsters who operated in the shadows, Greene enjoyed being in the public eye. He gave interviews, appeared on television, and even claimed to be a man of the people, fighting against a corrupt system. His open war against the mafia made Cleveland one of the most dangerous cities in America during the 1970s. Car bombings became a regular occurrence, leading to the city being nicknamed Bomb City, USA. The streets became battlegrounds, and both Greene's men and mafia soldiers lived in constant fear of being blown up or gunned down. But Greene's war was more than just a fight for territory. It was a direct challenge to the mafia's long-standing rule. By refusing to submit and striking back with equal, if not greater, force, he changed the landscape of organized crime in Cleveland forever. However, with each attack and each survival, he made more enemies. While he may have believed himself to be unstoppable, his relentless war against the mafia would eventually seal his fate. By the early 1970s, Danny Greene had become a larger-than-life figure in Cleveland's underworld, feared by some and admired by others. His war with the Italian Mafia had reached new heights, and the city streets turned into a battlefield. Unlike traditional mob hits, which were usually carried out with guns or knives, Greene and his enemies introduced a much deadlier and more destructive weapon: car bombs. Cleveland became the epicenter of an unprecedented wave of bombings. These weren't small-scale explosives, but powerful devices designed to ensure that their targets were completely destroyed. The use of car bombs in organized crime was not new, but never before had they been deployed on such a massive scale. Between 1975 and 1977 alone, more than 35 bombings were recorded in Cleveland, earning the city the nickname Bomb City, USA. Danny Greene himself became both a master of these bombings and a survivor of them. Unlike most criminals who preferred stealth, Greene had a reputation for walking away from explosions that should have killed him. One of the most infamous attempts on his life occurred in 1975 when a powerful bomb was planted in his car. Somehow, he sensed something was off and avoided the explosion, reinforcing the legend that he was untouchable. But Greene wasn't just a target. He was also an aggressor. He and his crew retaliated with their own bombing campaigns, targeting mafia figures, their businesses, and even their homes. The scale of destruction was something Cleveland had never seen before. Cars were blown apart in parking lots, businesses went up in flames, and key figures in organized crime were left in pieces. The bombs were not just tools of assassination. They were psychological weapons meant to instill fear. What made Greene even more dangerous was that he didn't operate like a traditional mobster. He didn't run a vast, structured organization with hundreds of men. Instead, he worked with a small, trusted group of violent criminals who were completely loyal to him. His operations were unpredictable and difficult for his enemies to counter. He moved frequently, rarely staying in one location for long. He often conducted meetings in public places, knowing that the mafia wouldn't dare strike him in broad daylight for fear of drawing too much law enforcement attention. The mafia was becoming increasingly desperate to eliminate him. They hired hitmen, planted more bombs, and used every method they could to take him out. Yet, each failed attempt only emboldened Greene, making him more confident and even taunting his enemies. He would appear in public, giving interviews where he openly mocked the mafia and presented himself as a fearless warrior against corruption. His ability to survive so many assassination attempts made people wonder if he was truly invincible. Some of his followers even believed he had supernatural protection, calling him the Irish Godfather or the man with 9 lives. But in reality, it was his intelligence, experience, and sheer audacity that allowed him to stay ahead of his enemies. However, while Greene saw himself as an untouchable force, his war tactics were also drawing the attention of law enforcement. The FBI, already tracking mafia activity in Cleveland, now had their sights set on Greene as well. The relentless bombings were making national headlines, and authorities knew that as long as Greene was alive, the war would continue. Yet, despite the chaos, Greene showed no signs of slowing down. He continued his bombing campaigns, eliminating key mafia figures one by one. His ability to disrupt and dismantle traditional crime families in Cleveland was unlike anything the city had ever seen. But as the war escalated, so did the determination of his enemies to finally put an end to his reign of terror. Unlike most gangsters who preferred to operate in the shadows, Danny Greene actively sought the spotlight. He was not just a criminal. He was a showman, a man who understood the power of image and perception. In a world where secrecy was the key to survival, Greene did the unthinkable. He openly spoke to the media, gave interviews, and built a public persona that made him seem more like a folk hero than a ruthless criminal. Greene carefully cultivated an image of himself as a fearless Irish warrior, a man of the people who stood against the corruption of the Italian Mafia. He painted himself as a modern-day Robin Hood, someone who fought for justice in a city dominated by organized crime. While he was deeply involved in extortion, loan sharking, and violence, he managed to convince many that he was simply fighting back against a broken system. His charisma was undeniable. He dressed sharply, spoke with confidence, and carried himself like a leader. His striking green eyes and imposing physical presence made him look like the kind of man who was always in control. He made sure people saw him as more than just a street thug. He was a strategist, a fighter, and, in his own eyes, a revolutionary. One of his most infamous public appearances came after a failed assassination attempt in 1975, when a bomb destroyed part of his home. Instead of retreating into hiding like most criminals would, Greene did something extraordinary. He set up a lawn chair in front of the wreckage and sat outside, completely unfazed, as reporters swarmed to cover the story. He smiled, cracked jokes, and acted as if nothing had happened. To those watching, it seemed as if Greene was truly untouchable, a man who had no fear. Greene also had a deep understanding of propaganda. He frequently made statements that portrayed him as a man fighting for the working class, standing up against mafia oppression. He would say things like, "The Italians have had their turn. Now it's time for the Irish to take over." This wasn't just rhetoric. It was a deliberate attempt to rally support among Cleveland's Irish-American community, many of whom admired his boldness. His relationship with journalists was unusual for a gangster. He often welcomed reporters, inviting them to interview him as he strolled through the streets of Cleveland or sat in his favorite restaurants. In these interviews, he downplayed his criminal activities and instead spoke about his love for Irish heritage, his disdain for the mafia, and his belief in destiny. He often referenced historical Irish warriors, comparing his fight against the Italian Mafia to Ireland's struggle for independence from British rule. Greene's public persona wasn't just for show, it was a strategic tool. By staying in the public eye, he made it harder for the Mafia to eliminate him. The more visible he was, the more difficult it became for his enemies to make him disappear quietly. If they killed him, it wouldn't just be another gangland murder. It would be a high-profile assassination that would bring even more law enforcement attention to Cleveland's organized crime scene. However, his arrogance also made him reckless. He underestimated just how determined his enemies were. His love for attention and his tendency to make enemies out of powerful people meant that, despite his growing legend, he was making himself a bigger target with each passing day. For years, Danny Greene had defied the odds. He had survived numerous assassination attempts, outmaneuvered the Italian Mafia, and turned Cleveland into a war zone of car bombings and gangland executions. But no man is invincible forever. Despite his confidence, his reputation as the man with 9 lives, and his ability to stay one step ahead, his luck was bound to run out. By 1977, Greene had become the #1 target of the Cleveland Mafia. His relentless war against the Italians had cost them millions in lost revenue, and his refusal to submit had shattered their authority in the city. The Mafia had tried to kill him multiple times, but each attempt had failed, only adding to his legend. However, the underworld had a saying, "Live by the bomb, die by the bomb." And that is exactly how Greene's story would end. The plan to assassinate him was meticulously organized. After several failed attempts, the Mafia turned to a trusted associate, hitman Ray Ferrito, who had a reputation for precision. Unlike previous efforts, this hit would be different. It would be patient, calculated, and impossible to survive. The opportunity came on October 6, 1977. That day, Danny Greene had an appointment at Dr. Art Snyderman's dental office in Lyndhurst, Ohio, a quiet suburban area outside Cleveland. The Mafia knew of his visit and set their plan into motion. A powerful bomb was hidden inside a cherry-red 1977 Chevrolet Nova parked in the lot across from the dentist's office. The vehicle was rigged with a remote-controlled explosive, one that would detonate at the exact moment Greene walked by. As he exited the dental office around 3 p.m., Greene, as usual, showed no signs of paranoia or fear. He walked toward his car, completely unaware that his death was seconds away. As he stepped near the rigged Chevrolet Nova, Ferrito, watching from a distance, pressed the detonator. A thunderous explosion erupted through the parking lot. The force of the blast ripped Greene apart, sending debris and body parts flying in all directions. The shockwave shattered windows, and smoke billowed into the air as panicked onlookers scrambled in horror. Unlike his previous brushes with death, There was no escape this time. Danny Greene was dead. News of his assassination spread quickly. The once invincible Irish gangster, who had taunted the mafia and survived countless attacks, had finally met his end. His brutal demise marked the end of an era, a turning point in Cleveland's violent gang wars. While the mafia had finally succeeded in killing their most dangerous rival, their victory was short-lived. The FBI, which had been closely monitoring Greene's activities as well as the mafia's attempts to kill him, saw his death as the perfect opportunity to dismantle Cleveland's underworld once and for all. The investigation into his murder led to a massive crackdown on organized crime, resulting in dozens of high-profile arrests, including that of James "Jack White" LaCavalier, the mafia boss who had ordered Greene's assassination. Although Danny Greene was gone, his legacy remained. His war against the mafia had exposed their weaknesses and brought unprecedented law enforcement attention to Cleveland's criminal operations. Ironically, in death, he had done more damage to the mafia than he ever could have while alive. Danny Greene's life and violent downfall left a lasting mark on Cleveland and the world of organized crime. His relentless war against the Italian Mafia and his refusal to bow to traditional crime syndicates made him one of the most infamous figures in American criminal history. But more than just a gangster, Greene became a symbol of defiance, of Irish-American identity, and of the shifting power dynamics in the underworld. One of the most immediate effects of Greene's war was the unprecedented use of car bombings in gangland conflicts. Before his reign, the mafia relied on traditional methods of assassination, gunmen in drive-bys, close-range executions, and occasional ambushes. But Greene revolutionized the way organized crime fought its wars. His heavy use of explosives turned Cleveland into a battleground, with car bombings occurring at an alarming rate. Even though he ultimately died by the very method he had popularized, his tactics changed the way criminal organizations handled disputes. Beyond the destruction, Greene's feud with the Cleveland Mafia directly contributed to its downfall. For decades, the Italian crime families had operated in the shadows, profiting from illegal businesses while maintaining a relatively low profile. But Greene's defiance and high-profile attacks brought national attention to Cleveland's underworld. His death became the catalyst for a massive law enforcement crackdown that dismantled much of the mafia's influence in the region. After his assassination, the FBI and federal prosecutors intensified their investigations into organized crime in Cleveland. The use of wiretaps, informants, and extensive surveillance led to the arrests and convictions of dozens of key mafia figures, including James "Jack White" LaCavalier, the very man who had ordered Greene's murder. This period of aggressive law enforcement efforts, known as Operation Green Hunter, crippled the mafia in Cleveland, leading to the near collapse of their once powerful empire. Greene's story also left an imprint on popular culture. His life, filled with violence, betrayals, and near-mythical escapes from death, became the subject of books, documentaries, and films. The 2011 movie Kill the Irishman, starring Ray Stevenson as Danny Greene, brought his story to a new generation, portraying him as both a brutal criminal and a charismatic rebel. His character has been referenced in numerous crime dramas and has become a legend in discussions about the decline of traditional organized crime in America. However, Greene's legacy is not purely one of crime and destruction. To some, especially among the Irish-American community, he remains a symbol of strength and independence. He often portrayed himself as a warrior fighting against oppression, drawing parallels between his struggles and the fight for Irish sovereignty. Whether or not this was simply self-serving propaganda, it resonated with many who admired his refusal to be controlled by the Italian Mafia. At the same time, his legacy is also a cautionary tale. While he was able to rise to power through sheer will and brutality, his overconfidence and thirst for dominance ultimately led to his downfall. His refusal to compromise, his open taunts against powerful enemies, and his reliance on extreme violence made him one of the most dangerous men in organized crime, but also one of the most vulnerable. Greene's impact on Cleveland, organized crime, and even law enforcement remains significant. His story is a reminder that in the world of crime, even the most powerful and feared figures are not untouchable. While he may have believed himself invincible, in the end, the forces he challenged proved stronger. But even in death, his war against the Mafia reshaped Cleveland's criminal landscape forever. Danny Greene's story is one of defiance, power, and inevitable downfall. He was a man who refused to kneel before the Mafia, who waged war with car bombs and fearlessness, and who built a reputation as Cleveland's most notorious gangster. His battle against the Italian Mafia not only reshaped organized crime in the city, but also led to its eventual unraveling. Yet, despite his cunning and resilience, Greene's fate was sealed the moment he made too many enemies. No gangster, no matter how bold, can escape the consequences of a life built on violence. In the end, he fell to the very tactics he had mastered, an explosive and brutal assassination that left his legend intact, but his life in ruins. His story remains a cautionary tale of power and hubris. Whether seen as a folk hero or a ruthless criminal, Danny Greene's legacy is undeniable. He shook the foundations of Cleveland's underworld, left a trail of destruction, and proved that even the most feared men are not invincible.